Yeah. Okay. I've been long in the other one, so I'll try to keep it briefer here and maybe just do one overall video here about Gould. Again, I've been trying to teach you in this class overall how what is criticism, but also just to so that you have a stake in the game and you feel like that um, that what I'm asking you to do is see the world more critically and really see yourself as a critic. Okay? You have a lot of education compared to other people, especially historically. Oh my God, we're a very educated society we live in, despite all the ignorance. So good job for that, you guys. And part of using that education is in a democracy is using it critically to not just obey but to question and try to see patterns and try to help people who need it. And just again, there's nothing. I have nothing against the communist principle of uh, give people what they need and get from them what they can give. Uh, we have a hell of a way of not doing that in this society for all our the good things about our society. We really don't have a problem with giving people what they need economically, and we often don't get what we should fully get from their abilities. Okay, because so many of our abilities are not, uh, I don't know, easily monetized, easily put into circulation in the market, reified, and so on as commodities. So, anyways, within that now we've been within that overall thing of wanting to be a critic, and as I was just doing, I'm like illustrating, we're talking about Marxist criticism now, and we're also talking about, really, when we talk about Marxist criticism, we're talking about history, and we're talking about uh, politics, okay? And one of the conventional ways criticism is always proceeded when it comes to history is through biography, okay? Biography. What was the great person's life like? Thomas Carlyle, this 19th century British uh, genius writer, wrote a great history of the French Revolution. Carlyle said the history of society is the biography of great men. Okay, and so this is a traditional thing: is when you're studying politics, when you're studying uh, history, when you're studying criticism, you're studying biography. Really, what are the lives of these great people like? And there are totally responses to that are very credible, including the idea of history from below. That is, forget the great men. What about the unsung people? What about the ordinary foot soldiers? We need their perspectives and all that stuff. And that's totally right on. I completely agree with that. If you've ever read a text like, uh, uh, Narrative of Life of a Negro Slave, Frederick Douglass's autobiography, you're seeing history from below. Now, the way Gould, who we're discussing, Gould is in a way uses the conceit of standard biographers in his short essays. That's why I'm mentioning biography here. Who is Gould again? Gould is not a Marxist per se, but influenced by Marxist thinking, as he was influenced by Darwin's thinking, but less so. Okay, through his family line. Gould was a very famous evolutionary theorist, paleontologist. So he came up with this idea of punctuated equilibrium, which revises Darwin's gradual view to be more stasis and then sudden change. That's the equilibrium is the stasis. The punctuation is the rapid development of new species. Okay, paleontology study of old, extinct things. Gould is especially living things and that were alive and now extinct. Gould is especially an expert in Sirion snails. Why snails? Where are they from? Haha, the Bahamas. He got to do his research in the Bahamas. Not bad. Not a bad way to spend your research time. And then Gould was what made him famous. Why I know of him, why I teach him, what you're reading by him are his popular scientific essays. Again, maybe I've mentioned this in class, but to remind you what an essay is. An essay is, in French, the word means attempt. It's a try to exercise your reasoning, exercise your judgment. Think for yourself. You show your scholarship, but don't lose your voice in all that learning that you have. The first guy to make them was a guy named Michel de Montaigne, and Montaigne um, thought of his readers as like his friends, and he thought of the essay as as where you were going to watch the drama of his thoughts unfolding. Okay, very beautiful. But he had his personal stamp on it. It wasn't pedantic that is obsessed with trivial knowledge. It was about wisdom. Okay, and so like for example in his essay on education, Montaigne says it's not how much education you have, it's the quality of the education you have. Okay, and you want precepts that will allow you to think freely, but not speculate wildly and baselessly. Okay, and he described the opposite of what he meant was someone who's so educated that their own thinking is drowned out by all the other smart people's voices always sounding in their head. Okay, so Gould is a model of this in the scientific world. As I said before, he was a master for illustrating general principles with little tiny intricate details, and that's what you see him doing in this essay. These two essays we're reading, the hearing for Vavilov, about Nikolai Vavilov, the martyr for scientific freedom in the Soviet Union. He was killed, or he died a political prisoner in a ridiculous circumstance in Stalinist Russia. And Stalin is a reactionary, counter-revolutionary tendency, kind of like Bonaparte, kind of like Hitler, and so on. Not the truth that Marx was aiming at in his drive to free ordinary people. And so in that essay, Gould is advocating for pluralism, meaning, what does that mean? It means having multiple perspectives gives more insight. That thesis gives more insight into something. So, for example, if you have a significant problem in a government or society, like today with the virus, they have a meeting. They're going to have people from different facets of life. They're not just going to have the scientists. They're going to have business people there. They're not just going to have the business people and the scientists. They're going to have representatives from the Congress there, because they are more responsible to people than business people or scientists are. Okay, so there's multiple perspectives on a significant problem. And then in the second essay, the idea of presence, that is judging things by where we are now. That this can be limiting. Judging things by where we are now can be limiting. It can make us criticize someone that we should actually appreciate. Okay, and that's what Gould is saying about Marx in this essay. So let's start with the first one, Vavilov. So as maybe you know, there's a revolution in Russia in 19... That's the wrong side of the marker. There's a revolution in Russia in 1917. And this leads to a nominally communist government in the country. Okay? 1917. And I won't go over all the details. Revolution in Russia. You probably heard of this. They fight a civil war. They win. The revolution comes out of they fight off the monarchical forces. The United States, all these European countries are against them. They somehow win. And they take power, and then there's, in 1924, Stalin's rise to power. And by the 1930s, there's a dictatorship that we call totalitarian, meaning the leader is all powerful and has total control and is deified. And this was not how it was supposed to work out. It was called a dictatorship of the proletariat in Marx's writings, but that was supposed to be a transitional form before communism. Initially, because Bonaparte's people were dictators for the bourgeoisie, the only way to actually oust them and take control would be through that similar kind of dictator, but on part of working people. Okay, it's a kind of speculative concept, but you've seen, for example, when people talk about Fidel Castro, he would be an instance of this, or Kim Jong-un, the Un dynasty in North Korea, and so on. But in any case, this had all kinds of strange ramifications in the 30s, including all these show trials where people were forced to confess. People who used to be revolutionaries were considered disloyal and killed or put into exile. There was a limitation, big time, on freedom of expression and free speech, and there was a limitation on, in Vavilov's case, Vavilov dies for doing free scientific inquiry. He's studying wheat and grain, and he has this theory called the theory of homologous series. And the way he interprets his theory, it's not Darwinian. It's determinist. He says the natural selection, actually, if you look at like wheat and rye, although they're not related, they have this, they're not the same species. Within those species, the way the variation works is really similar. They'll develop the same sort of like little subspecies within each species. And he said this wasn't because of natural selection, although now we know it is. He said it's because of some inherent, like sort of the DNA or the genes of the plants was working this way. And what's wrong with saying that? Well, he took it too far, and according to the people in Stalinist Russia, it became a seemingly secretly reinforcing capitalism. It's a crazy idea, but their idea was that he's being deterministic. He's saying the plants can only evolve from what's already encoded in them. They can't change. And the whole notion with Marxism and the whole idea with Marxism was supposed to be that there could be really fundamental change caused by the social and historical processes, even in living things. Okay, even in the natural world, this was supposed to work like this. It's madness. And then Gould says, Vavilov had a nice idea that was, although he was remembered for dying for this, he was arrested for this by this guy Lysenko, who had all these crazy notions about how, you could see communism in the natural world itself, which you can't, but politically, it was convenient to say that to someone like Stalin because it seemed like you were being really obedient and dogmatic and doctrinaire about your communism, okay? And Lysenko rose in the ranks from this and killed Vavilov. So just a point to you to where Lysenko comes to destroy Vavilov is, this is on page 141. And Vavilov was wrong to say it wasn't natural selection, but he was right to say that there were forces internal to the organism, not outside of the environment where natural selection is working, that were also part of an important factor, often overlooked factor when you're being very too dogmatic, not pluralistic enough. Sorry, I took the word. Not pluralistic enough about explaining evolution. Just want to point you to where Gould sort of shows this. And the word dialectical comes up here a lot. You just have to think of that as having to do with change and how change occurs through interaction of contrary states. Like the dialectic of the class struggle is the fight between the oppressor and the oppressed. Now there's all kinds of little inner class rivalries within all that, but that's the big dialectic according to and Engels really said that was the law of human evolution, like the way natural selection worked in the natural world. The dialectic of class struggle was the law by which human societies evolve. Okay. Maybe going too far, but interesting, bold formulation. Bottom of 41 here. Madness often displays a perverse but cogent reason in its own terms. And we must admit that Lysenko did identify and exploit the true weaknesses of Vavilov's argument. Vavilov did underplay the creative role of evolution, and his chemical analogy did betray a belief in the prefigured potential as a source of later and in some sense illusory change. But Lysenko was also who was also both a charlatan and a cruel polemicist, that is, he made unfair, mean arguments all the time, was equally undialectical, despite his protestation to the contrary in viewing plants as putty before a molding environment. Vavilov died in the name of phony Lamarckism. Jean-Baptiste Lamarck was a French pre-Darwinian biologist, and he had a competing theory of evolution that said that evolution happened really rapidly, and it got progressively better because organisms basically, if they acquired any characteristic during their own lifetime, they would pass it on immediately to the next offspring. It doesn't work that way, and we didn't know why at the time, but the way we now know that genes code and express themselves by chance, to a large degree, that you have dominant and recessive traits in your genes, and some are not expressed. They're just in recess. Lamarck didn't have any of those concepts. He thought the world was just quickly getting better, and organisms were leading to higher forms, culminating in us, like that old stupid, from the ape to the human standing upright kind of notion. Vavilov died in the name of phony Lamarckism. He became a legitimate martyr in the West, but his ideas did not flourish as a result. The law of homologous series, the organizing theme of his evolutionary work, was ignored in the name of overly strict Darwinism. And then Gould basically goes on to show you this guy's idea that within different plants or different sorts of animals, there could be the same sort of variations, and that those variations could be a part of a distant heritage in an old relative, and that the pathways, the channels that were there, were not infinite. There was like a finite series of options the organism had because of this inheritance. Okay, that this has helped Gould and other scientists make all these new formulations in a sort of enhancing our understanding of evolution by going beyond Darwin's theory, not disagreeing with it, but saying it's not all there is to evolution. It's not all just natural selection. There are internal formal constraints in an organism. You can't just evolve overnight. I can't become a chicken tomorrow or something. My genes don't code that way. They'll go in one, they just do certain things. Okay, I'm getting a little fatter now, staying indoors all the time. And just a beautiful paragraph right at the end here, page 144. A complete theory, again, speaking of Gould's talking about pluralism, and that's really one thing that was lost in the Soviet Union, was plural, at least under Stalin. They got it back a little bit, but then it was too late, and America was coming for them. Pluralism, this multiple perspectives. A complete theory of evolution must acknowledge a balance between external forces of environment imposing selection for local adaptation and internal forces representing constraints of inheritance and development. Vavilov placed too much emphasis on internal constraints and downplayed the power of selection. Okay, so he messed up. He should have acknowledged that selection was the main engine. But on the other hand, other people downplayed what he brought to our attention. But Western Darwinians have erred equally in practically ignoring the limits placed upon the selection by structure and development, what Vavilov and the older biologists have called laws of form. The internal constraints of the living organism are part of its evolutionary trajectory, not just the environment around it, although the environment over time is dominant and crucial. Okay, we need, in short, a real dialectic between internal and external factors of evolution. And then again, that goes back to that term value, that struggle between contraries. And our full understanding has to become a synthesis of the best insights, the best qualities that can emerge from looking at both the external form and external environment and the internal form of the organism. Vavilov's personal tragedy cannot be undone, but he has been rehabilitated in Russia, and this shows you that in the 1980s and even everything after the Party Congress, where Khrushchev admitted all Stalin's flaws. I'm forgetting the name of the events. Things. There was an opening. There was more freedom. But he has been rehabilitated in Russia, where the All Union Society of Geneticists and Selectionists now bears his name. We who view him as a martyr and champion his name while ignoring his ideas would do well to reconsider the old non-Darwinian tradition that he represented. Combined with our legitimate conviction about the power of selection, the principle of homologous series, and other laws of form, might foster an evolutionary theory truly synthetic in its integration of development and organic form, with a body of principles now dominated by ecology and the effects of selection upon single traits and genes. So just to read again, combined with our legitimate conviction of the power of selection, the principle of homologous series and other laws of form might foster an evolutionary theory truly synthetic, that is combining all these things, natural selection and laws of form, in its integration of development and organic form with a body of principles now dominated by ecology and the effects of selection upon single genes and traits. Okay, sorry, this video went long. I didn't even discuss the last one, so I'll be back at you with that about presentism and why there was this conservative scientist at Gould at Marx's funeral. Again, this is Stephen Jay Gould writing about science in the Soviet Union and the dark turn it took when ideological rigidity, that is, the belief that communist principles had to be visible in the natural world itself, took precedent over free scientific inquiry, a real blow to human freedom, intellectual freedom, academic freedom, and really the main concept that's at stake, that's being harmed in all that is pluralism. We need pluralism, and they didn't have it there, and Vavilov suffered as a result.